That's what we're gonna do. Okay, cool. Haha, boobs. And if this series doesn't get finished, I'm going to be mad. Today's gonna be kind of a wrap up of my March/April TBR that I set back in February when I asked my boyfriend to pick me 5 books to read in March, and I've read them all, so this is going to be the wrap up of those. If you haven't seen the books that I was given to read, then I'll leave a link, but the books that I read were Red Sister by Mark Lawrence, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, The Martian by Andy Weir, and Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Those were the 5 books I read. They're all very, as I said in that video, they're all very much out of my regular reading choices. But you know, that was kind of why I wanted to do this, and what was kind of the most exciting part about it, because I've never read any of these authors. There's a couple of sci-fi books in there, and I don't read sci-fi, which I say all the time, but I don't read it. And a couple of fantasy books that have always kind of been on my radar, but not necessarily near the top of my list, and something a little bit different in fantasy also. I have a list of his predictions of what he thinks I've rated them, but also more so where I've ranked them. There were definitely some I really enjoyed, some not so much. But yeah, so his predictions for my ranking were: number 1 is Red Sister, which he predicted to be a 5-star. Number 2 is The Name of the Wind, predicted as a 4 or a 4.5. Number 3 is The Blade Itself, which is predicted to be a 4. Then Children of Time with a 3 or a 3.5. And number 5 is The Martian with a predicted 2-star. To be honest, for the most part, it's probably fairly accurate, to be honest with you, but my number 1 spot is incorrect. Shocker, I know. Red Sister was actually the first book that I read for this, and I really enjoyed it a lot. So I think Mark Lawrence is known for kind of grim, dark books, but I don't think this series necessarily comes under that label. But I read that first and I really enjoyed it. And out of all of them, I think that was the series that I was most excited to carry on with. But it was not my top spot, which I'll get to next. But this one, Red Sister, we'll talk about first because it was one I read first. This one I really, really enjoyed. It was really just not what I expected. I think in my sort of like TBR videos that I did of this, I mentioned about there being like murderous nuns and all this stuff, because I just knew there were nuns, I knew there was killing and things, and I put 2 and 2 together and kind of come up with 5. But yeah, it was really not what I expected, so I'm not going to give spoilers in this, obviously. So we follow Nona, who is like, in the first book, she's like 8 years old or something. She doesn't really quite know how old she is, because where she comes from, they don't really mark dates and things, but she's around 8, which I didn't expect for a book that I knew to be kind of dark. So when we meet Nona, she is about to be hanged for something she did, which, you know, it's already off on a pretty dark foot. She's 8 years old and she's about to be hanged. But she ends up getting taken away by Abbess Glass, who is the kind of leader of the Sweet Mercy convent. So she is a nun, and she takes in Nona, and it's essentially like a school for young girls, and they are essentially trained to kind of refine their skills to become like the most deadly assassins, pretty much. And there's like kind of some magic-y elements there as well. So it's kind of like a magic school, assassin school, convent thing. For the most part, this book, I mentioned to Alex while I was reading this that it kind of felt like, if you've read The Poppy War, the first half of The Poppy War, where Rin is in the kind of magic school and like that kind of stuff, this book felt pretty similar to that, but like the whole book rather than just like the first half where like it is in the Poppy War. And yeah, so she gets trained, and like her lessons are in you know, like fighting and blade and things. But then there's also the magic. The magic in this is quite like vague for the most part in the first book. Like you don't really quite understand what's going on, and like it's quite like you hear words like the path and things, but you don't quite know what that means. But as Nona learns, you learn, which I really like in a book. I like to like learn along with the main character. And I really like Nona. Nona was a great character. Like I said, Nona is like 8 years old. All the main, like all her friends and things are all really young. They don't feel young, in like as young as 8, but what I liked was the kind of dynamics between some of the girls felt very real, particularly coming from, you know, kind of a male author. The kind of bitchiness and like arguments, the petty arguments that you kind of tend to see in younger girls felt kind of real. But I really like the dynamics between all the characters and their relationships and rivalries and things. The side characters I also really enjoyed. So you have kind of some of the sisters and the nuns at the convent, or the teachers. I just personally have a crush on Sister Apple, because of course I do. If you've read the books, you know who I'm talking about and why I have a crush on her. But she kind of just owns me. Yeah, the side characters are also really great, and everyone just kind of fits together really well, and it's a really great female centric cast, which I'm always a fan of. I always really like that, and I thought it was done really well in this. One issue I kind of had with this book, it wasn't even really an issue, I didn't really mark it down for it, was the overall plot. I didn't quite know what it was for the most part. Like, it all felt very contained in this magic school plot of Nona going through the school, but I couldn't really see past that and what like the bigger picture was for the whole series. As I've gone on, because I've now actually read, I read Red Sister, I have now actually read Grey Sister, and the short story between Grey Sister and Holy Sister, and I just started Holy Sister this morning, so I am just flying through this series. Obviously now I know a little bit more about where that kind of bigger conflict is headed, but I kind of didn't really know what the bigger picture was going to be when I was reading the first book, is just the one thing I noted down really. I will say it did set up like a really good foundation for the rest of the series, so kind of a lot of the work is done and the foundations are set in the first book, so that was good. Oh, something that it does do, so while I didn't really know what the bigger conflict would be, something that this book does have is the prologue, the epilogue, and a scene in the middle, I believe, are kind of done in the future, and like quite far into the future, and you don't really know what's happening, but I think that was kind of the saving grace for knowing where this series would be headed, because you're just like, you don't quite know what's going on in that scene because it's the same scene, but you're kind of dying to find out how we get to that point. So that was really interesting. I really liked that. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I love Nona. I think she's such a kind of, she's not even really like a dark character. She just kind of has dark tendencies and kind of violent tendencies for the most part, but she has like a really tragic backstory kind of thing going on, and I just feel a lot for Nona. I feel a real attachment to her, and I love her relationship with Arabella, and I'm really excited about that. Something also to note is this book does feature sapphic characters, a fair amount actually. Like, it's kind of a running theme throughout. Sister Apple and Sister Kettle, Sister Apple, who is my crush, they're in a relationship, and also, can I just say, they are probably my favourite relationship. When I started Grey Sister, there's a scene with those two, and I literally cried. It was like chapter 1 of the second book, and I was crying because I felt so attached. But their relationship is, I love it a lot, and I'm just really excited to see where the series goes. Because like I said, I'm literally on the last book now, and I can't wait. Also then, Mark Lawrence has another series which is set in the same world, which is really exciting, and I can't wait to read that either. Also, I didn't really talk about the world so much. So the world is Abeth, and it's kind of covered in ice, except for this one part kind of in the middle called the corridor, which is kept free from ice by an artificial moon which focuses light from the sun down and keeps the corridor free. But the corridor is closing in and the ice is closing in, and the world itself is also really interesting, as well as the characters in it. So I'm really excited. I'm having a great time, and I did end up giving this 5 stars. This one and one of the others, I kind of floated around with my ratings on, just because once I finished them, I was like, okay, those are really good, but I'm more excited for the rest of it, like it was a foundation. But then I found myself really like itching to carry on, so I ended up bumping it up to 5. And I'm just having the best time. I highly recommend this as a kind of darker, but it's not like, it has quite dark parts, but it's not like super dark. But the magic is really interesting. It's kind of shadowy, and like I said, it starts a bit vague, but then you kind of learn more, and it's really interesting, and I'm really excited / scared to finish reading it. But I highly recommend you read this. So then we move on to the next book, which wasn't the next book I read, but it was my favourite one. The next book was my favourite one, and potentially, I say potentially, is absolutely going on my favourites shelf, and I really enjoyed it, and it's the one book I read that I didn't change my rating on after reading. I rated this straight away and I stuck with it. It was so good and unexpected because she's divisive. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Oh my god, this book did a number on me, and I really, really enjoyed it. I gave this 5 stars, and it is going on my favourite shelf. So, this book, I mentioned this in my TBR video, I was very apprehensive about this because it is pretty much one of the most popular kind of modern fantasy books out there. They're very conflicting reviews on it. I know people who absolutely love it. I know people who absolutely hate it. I didn't expect to be on the side of the people who loved it, but I did. I read this book. This was the quickest book I read, and it was actually the longest one too, which kind of shows you how I felt about it. I read this in pretty much 2 or 3 days and just flew right through it. It was so good. I can't believe it either, trust me. I think the one thing that really stood out to me and made this a favourite was mainly the writing. I found the writing to be really, really just good. Like, it was so good and almost lyrical or poetic in some parts. Like, it wasn't overly flowery, I don't think, but there were just certain parts you read and you'd be like, wow, yeah, I've read a couple of reviews now since reading the book, and something that a lot of people picked up on was the theme of music throughout the book. Music is a very important part of the main story in this, and I just think it was written so well because it almost seemed to just jump off the page. There was one scene in particular where Quoth plays a song, and it's a song that's kind of renowned for bringing people to tears, and it's supposed to be really hard to play. And I read this scene and I felt myself getting emotional while I was reading it, despite the fact that I couldn't hear it, obviously. Didn't even have the lyrics to read the sad story, and I felt it still, which I think kind of adds to a large part of my enjoyment of this. In terms of the story in this book, we follow Quoth, and it's kind of a story in a story, kind of like, this is a random comparison, I know, but if you've read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, where it's the main character is writing a memoir of their life, and that's what you're reading at the same time as the present day narrative, this is kind of what that feels like. It's the same style of storytelling. So we have Kvothe in the present day, who is kind of in hiding. He's got a different name, and he's very much an infamous figure that everybody recognises, but he is, you know, just living in hiding, in quiet, on his own. You don't know why. And then somebody shows up who is called the Chronicler, and he writes stories, and he wants to write Kvothe's memoir, because he works out that he is Kvothe, and Kvothe says, okay, fine. And then he tells his story, and he's telling his story over 3 days, and this series will potentially be a trilogy, and each book is kind of one of those days. So it follows Kvothe's life from, you know, being a child, and then this book ends, like, he's still, like, I think the book ends with him being like 15, and there's still a lot of ground to cover. And if this series doesn't get finished, I'm going to be mad. I'm going to be very, very mad, because I have a lot of questions, all of which need answering, and I really just love this book, and I would love to see it finished. That's the only reason that I wasn't, why this wasn't the series that I was most excited to carry on with, just because once I've read book 2, I don't know how long I'll be waiting for the last book, and that kind of makes me sad. So, yeah. But I really liked Kvothe as a character. A lot of people don't like him. I liked him. I thought he was kind of... he was very obnoxious and unlikable, but I liked him for that in terms of a character. And what I like is the kind of... because it's him telling his story, there's a lot of embellishment happening. There's a lot of, you know, adding little things to the stories that are not quite true, but they make him look really good. So I actually find that quite interesting, because then you're reading the story and you're like, hang on a minute, like, really? And I don't know, it just adds another layer to the story, I guess, because you're never quite sure which parts are real and which parts are a little bit less real. But yeah, I really liked him. I thought he was, like I said, he was very obnoxious, but I liked him. I don't know what that says about me, but yeah, I also liked the side characters. My favourites being Eladin, who is the kind of stereotypical wacky, crazy teacher who I presume will have a greater role in mentoring Kvothe, and Ori. I really liked Ori. So Kvothe meets Ori, and she's kind of living sort of underground. She's suffering from some mental health problems, and she doesn't quite know what's going on, but Kvothe develops a friendship with her, and it's just so pure, and I love her a lot, and I really like her, and if anything bad happens to her, I'm going to be upset. That's all I will say. The other main character is Denna, and I can see why people don't like Denna. I don't quite know how I feel about her yet. So Denna is Kvothe's love interest in this story, and she's not very likeable for the most part, I will be honest. She kind of always shows up. Kvothe gets, like, you know, heart eyes, and then she leaves, and she's gone, and you don't know why, or with who she's gone with, and you just, I don't know. She's a difficult one, but I'm quite excited to see more about her backstory and why she does this, and why she is the way she is. And also Kvothe, by the way, like, I say I like him, he definitely has some ickier moments. Like, towards the end of the book, he kind of starts acting a bit like a nice guy, and don't love that. I don't love that. Overall, I liked him, and I really liked this book, and the magic was really interesting too. The magic is sympathy, and it's kind of the connections between things, like the connection between everything, and using that connection to make the magic work. To be honest with you, I probably am not explaining it very well, because I don't think I fully understand it myself, but I really liked it anyway. But yeah, this book, I really, really like this book, and I am praying to Patrick Rothfuss that he will finish this book, this series, because I need answers to things. I just need to know how it ends, because there's still so much time between where this leaves off and the Kvothe we know now. There's just so many questions, and I really love this book, and this is like one of my favourite fantasy books I've read in a long time. The reason this one is going to be my favourite is because once I finished it, it was the one that I kept thinking back to and the one that kept coming back into my head. So I think that's why. And I just really love it. And I'm as confused as you are, probably. The final fantasy book that I read was The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, which is the first book in the First Law trilogy. And this was the one fantasy book in this list that I was like, ooh, I don't know. Because this is very much renowned for being a part of the grimdark genre, which I've always been a little bit scared of. It feels like a very male-centric genre, so I've always kind of felt like it's not for me, like I'm not quite allowed for that. I know that's probably really stupid and it's probably not true, but like it feels like a very male subgenre of fantasy, and it feels like it was always kind of off limits to me. But screw that. I read this book and I loved it a lot. Alex predicted that I would give this a 4-star. I actually ended up giving this a 5. I don't know what's happened to me. All these books are so good. But yeah, this was a very different experience than any I've had before in my fantasy journey thus far. This was definitely dark. It was definitely just, I don't even know. It was just not what I expected, but also kind of what I expected. So when I hear the word grimdark, it's quite a vague term. I feel like it's very open to interpretation and doesn't quite mean anything, or it doesn't mean the same thing to every person. And I just didn't really know what to expect. I was like, okay, so is it just going to be like super cynical, violent, I don't even know, just bad vibes all around? And the answer is yes. It was bad vibes all around for the most part. But at the same time, it had just such good characters. So I think when I talk about these 3 books that I've talked about so far, I think plot-wise and like vibe-wise, Red Sister was like the best for that. In terms of like, I can't wait to see what happens next. That was Red Sister. Name of the Wind was writing and just the visuals. It felt very visual and descriptive. And that's where that excelled. And then this one was the characters. The characters were just insane, like insanely good. Similarly to Red Sister, this one was not too heavy on plot and felt a lot more like setting the foundations for the whole series rather than having like too much plot in this, which I'm absolutely fine with. This one was very much introducing the characters, introducing the world a little bit and the conflicts going on. And it was really good. So we have quite a fairly sizable cast in this, and we follow, who do we follow? We follow maybe 4 main POV characters. There are a couple we switch out every now and again, but there are maybe 4 main ones. Logan Ninefingers is the first one we meet, and he is great. I love him a lot. He has a very tragic backstory, which is a theme throughout all these. They pretty much all have a tragic backstory. And, you know, you meet him and he's been separated from his crew, who he presumes to all be dead. You find out his family, his wife and his kids are also dead. He's from the north and he stumbles upon, well, he still doesn't stumble upon, he meets Bayaz, who is a wizard. And Bayaz is great. Bayaz is a great character. Bayaz is an interesting one because he kind of seems to have an end goal in sight and seems to be setting up the pieces for something, because he knows who like all of these characters are and he's kind of gathering them up for something, and you don't quite know what. Like, I don't quite know what. Then we have Jezzel. I don't like Jezzel. Jezzel sucks. Jezzel is your typical privileged, rich, whiny character, and he just really sucks. Like, he really thinks very highly of himself, and every time I got to one of his chapters I was just like tearing my hair from my head. It was just like, oh my god. Like, there's one point where he is his friend asks him to show his sister around the city, and he's like, oh well, I hope she's not, you know, ugly, I hope she's not fat, I hope, you know, all this stuff. And I'm like, because he has a reputation to uphold, and I was like, okay, okay, okay. That's what we're gonna do. Okay, cool. And he just kind of sucks throughout like most of the book. He had a couple of moments towards the end in which I started to feel a bit less cold towards him, I guess, but then he just went and ruined it again because he sucks. I'm sure I won't feel this way at the end of the series because I'm sure there's going to be some development there. I hope there is, but right now he sucks and I don't like him. Then we also have Glockter. Glockter is my favourite character. There's one other character that is my favourite character, but he's probably my second favourite character. He was a prisoner of war for a time and he was tortured, and his leg, he's got a disability now and he has to use a cane, and he can't walk properly. His teeth are, this was the worst part, like I felt, because he can't eat properly because his teeth have been removed, but like in alternate ways. So it's like he has a tooth here but it's missing there, then he has this one but this one's missing, then he has this one but this one's missing. It's kind of like a zigzag, so he can't chew because the teeth don't, I don't like that. That's really horrible. But now he works as an inquisitor and essentially tortures people for a living, and he's not the best. He's not the best guy, but I feel a lot of emotions towards him, and he just I said this when I was reading the book. I was like, everybody just needs a cuddle, and just because they're all in a bad place, they're all doing bad things, they've all done bad things, they've all had bad things done to them. That's the thing as well that I liked about this book in terms of the characters, was none of them are good people. Like, there's not a standout hero protagonist that you're like, oh my god, I'm rooting for this person, because as soon as you start rooting for someone, you kind of take a step back and you go, wait, but they did this and that wasn't, like it makes you question your morals quite a bit. But yeah, the last character that we get introduced to in part 2 is Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is the one female main character in this cast, and I love Pharaoh. I love Pharaoh a lot. She's my favourite character, I think. She is great. She has also been through some horrible stuff. We don't quite know the extent of that yet, but she has. But she's a bad bitch. She is. She's just my favourite kind of character, where she's violent, she hates men. Therefore, she's my favourite character and I love her a lot. And she's the one for me that has the most intrigue and mystery about her, because you learn some more things about her towards the end of the book and you're like, wait, like, that's a little weird. And you want to kind of know the significance of that. So yeah, I think the characters in this book just really shine and they're just great. And it's worth reading just for the characters, because if you're into your kind of morally grey, morally questionable stuff, I think you'll love these characters. In terms of writing as well, one thing I also really liked was at the start of the book, all these characters are very separate and like not linked to each other at all. But I didn't feel like it was disjointed, and I think I kind of pinpointed one reason why, and that's because a thing that I've noticed that Joe Abercrombie does is he repeats kind of phrases and things. Like a lot of the characters, like Logan, has like a couple of phrases that he says like quite often, but what I noticed between a couple of the chapters was one character would say something or do something, but then in the next chapter or a couple of chapters later, another character who's completely separate would do or say the same thing, and it's like one of those subtle things that links them, but even though they're not together, and it just makes everything feel connected and like it flows better. For example, Baez at one point, he says like a phrase about, there's more than one way to crack an egg, if we fail we try another, and then like ages later in the book, when we first really meet Pharaoh, she says the same thing, except she says there's more than one way to crack a man's skull or something like that, and it's like the same phrase but in a different context and a different character, but like links them a little bit, if that makes sense. Or stays are a theme in this book. Like when we first meet Glockter, he's struggling to get down a flight of stairs and he can't do it, and he's struggling with stairs, and stairs are kind of his enemy in life as a disabled person. But then in contrast with that, we have Jezzel, who those two hate each other, and it's kind of this relationship where Jezzel is everything Glockner used to be or could have been if what happened to him didn't happen. And then we see Jezzel, and he's like whining about his training, and he like runs up and down flights of stairs like and complains about it because it's hard work. But then we have Glockner, who can't get down like a regular flight of stairs, and there's kind of that link and that contrast there to set up the relationship between those. And it's just subtle things that I really enjoyed, and I just thought the writing in this was really, really good. If you're into darker stories and darker books, I would highly recommend this. The kind of magical elements to it are kind of minimal, at least so far, and I just feel like it's not going to be like, a Sanderson book or anything, but there's some intrigue in terms of some of the things in the world. Like there's one of the kind of antagonists are a group of people called the Eaters, which seem absolutely terrifying, and we've like barely seen them. We've seen them like one time, and they kind of scare me because from my understanding right now, they're kind of cannibals, but magical and evil. I don't know, but if you like darker stories, I would recommend checking this out. I really enjoyed it, and like I said, the characters are just worth it. But I would say if you're a bit more sensitive, then to check out some of the content warnings for this book. Just general violence, general just badness. There's an instance of domestic violence in this, which was really hard to read, so just be warned of that. Overall, she got her 5 stars, so I'm really excited to find out where this goes. The last 2 books are probably the ones I'm going to talk about the least, because they're the sci-fi ones, because I'm not a sci-fi gal. It's just how it goes. So Children of Time was an interesting book, and one I had never heard of and probably would never have picked up on my own. I definitely wouldn't have picked this up on my own. This book is essentially a zoomed out bird's eye view of the evolution of an entire species, because when the book starts, it's essentially this group of people have created kind of I can't remember the word for it. It's like an artificial Earth environment on another planet to kind of try and colonize that planet. Something goes wrong, basically people don't want that to happen, and there's like this group of kind of rebels, I guess, and they stop that from happening. And one of the things that they'd set up on this planet was kind of an accelerated evolution that they plan to use on monkeys to essentially reintroduce humans to this planet. That doesn't happen, the monkeys end up getting killed, but the genetic material, the virus that infects them, does go down to the planet and infects everything that's already there, which is essentially all the bugs and the fish and all those things. And we follow Portia, who is a species of spider, and every Portia you meet is like, a different, more evolved version of the spider. So which is a weird concept, but you follow the spiders as they evolve, and they start to like develop, they start to just, become more sentient, and they start to build, cities and develop kind of an economy, and they make fire, they learn to make fire, they make computers and radio signals and electricity, and like, it's insane when you're reading it because it sounds nuts, but then you read it and because you see it all happening, it all makes sense. You're like, oh my god. And it brings forward a lot of discussion, which in terms of, sexism, slavery, like there's a lot of social commentary going on in this book that I think is quite interesting. It's definitely a really interesting read. So you have the spider plotline going on, but then it's alternated with chapters with a ship called the Gilgamesh, which holds essentially the last of humanity. And this is humans from thousands of years after the original woman who started the experiment with the spiders. So they're like not from the same level of humanity at all. There's thousands of years between them. And they are the last of humanity because Earth is dying. They are trying to find a planet to land on, and etc, etc. And there's a lot of drama on that ship as well, and yeah, there's a lot going on. Like I said, I think I gave this book a 3.5 stars because this kind of made me reevaluate how I rate books, because I feel like for the most part when I rate books I rate on enjoyment, and like how quickly I can get through, and like entertainment value really. And this one wasn't necessarily the most entertaining read. It was quite hefty, and if you're not into kind of, there's a lot of kind of information overload a lot of the time, and there's a lot of scientific jargon, but like not too much. It's just quite heavy to try and get through. Particularly in the middle, I feel like there's a bit of a lull, but the end is really good. The end section of the book is really good and kind of action packed. This took me a while to read, and like I said, it wasn't particularly entertaining, and like I couldn't speed through it, but I feel like it was worth reading for the kind of commentary and the discussions it brings up, and it was also just really interesting to think about the idea of, you know, a species like a spider evolving in that way and becoming almost human. And yeah, it's just really interesting. I would recommend it if you're into your sci-fi and if you are into that idea. It is definitely really interesting. I would say, I do kind of wish there was a film, as silly as that sounds. I just feel like this book lends itself to an adaptation. I feel like it would be really good. Like, it's quite visual, and you know, this, I don't know, I just feel like it would be really good. I would recommend this book, and I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it. It just wasn't my usual typical read, and I'm not in a rush to read the second book, because also there is a second book, but I will say this book ends. This book could be a standalone, and you'd be pretty happy with it, I think. So yeah, so that was that book. And then lastly, I read The Martian by Andy Weir, which was by far my least favourite book on this list. I did not like this book. Like I just didn't like this book. I started it out and I was like, okay, this seems like it's going to be a pretty quick read, but it ends up taking me several days and I just didn't enjoy it. Again, I mean, look, I'm just clearly not into the heavy sci-fi. Not that this is necessarily heavy sci-fi, I'm just not into like space travel, really, I don't think. But this, if you don't know, which I'm sure you do because the film was big, the book is big, we follow Mark Watney, who finds himself stranded on Mars, and he has to try and survive on Mars for over a year, and until somebody can come and rescue him. And it's a really interesting concept because, like, I wouldn't know where to begin to survive on Mars, I don't know about you, but it's really interesting concept. But I just found Mark Watney to be really unlikable, and I really didn't like him, like, at all. He was insufferable. I'm not going to dwell on this, I just thought he was really insufferable, and his humour was like 15-year-old boy humour, where he would be like told to not swear because his message is being broadcast, and he sends like haha boobs, and you're like, you're a grown-ass man with many qualifications that allow you to survive on Mars, and you send haha boobs. I don't know, I did not like the humour. I thought, just generally, like, I didn't like Mark, but I also just thought the characters and the dialogue in general was just really clunky and robotic and didn't quite, I don't know, I just didn't like it. I thought it was really not very good. I don't know, I feel like everyone loves this book and it's just me who doesn't like it. Except I also buddy read this, I didn't mention this, I buddy read this with my friend Tati, who also pretty much felt the same way as me, which kind of validates me a little bit because I feel like everyone else I know loves this book. But she does actually love the film, and I am going to watch the film. I'm very interested in watching the film. So I just feel like the film would just be a lot better, because I just don't think the actual writing of Mark vibed with me. I did not like him one bit, so I'm giving this book 2 stars. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I'm really sorry. And also, this was really heavy on the scientific jargon. Like, a lot. Like, I found it quite difficult to understand. And yeah, no, like, that's not for me. Like, which is why I also think it lends itself more to a movie, is because when I'm reading all this stuff that's happening, or like things are breaking, or things are going wrong, I don't know what any of these things do, and I don't actually know what's going on. So I'm just kind of relying on context clues to know if something that's happening is good or bad. I don't quite know what's going on. Whereas in a film, if I can see it, I feel like I'd understand it more. I just felt like this was not very accessible for your average person. I don't think. But I could be wrong, and I probably am wrong. I just didn't find it very accessible or very easy to read. I found it quite difficult. So I didn't enjoy this book. I'm sorry for all the people who like The Martian. I'm sorry. But that was my least favourite. And that was all the books that I read for this little experiment. So my ranking is probably The Name of the Wind at the top. I would put actually Red Sister and Blade itself probably the same in second place. Then Children of Time, then The Martian at the bottom. The fantasy ones were just so good, and I'm really excited to read the rest of all of them. Like I said, I'm literally probably going to finish the last Book of the Ancestor book tomorrow, maybe, and I'm really excited about that. And then after that, I'll probably finish the First Law trilogy, because I'm really excited about that too. The Wise Man's Fear, I'm just putting off because I don't want to be left without a finale, because that's going to annoy me. But yeah, overall, I think this was really successful. We had 5 stars, having a great time. So yeah, if you read any of these, please let me know what you thought of them. Like I said, some of these I know are pretty divisive. I know The Name of the Wind is quite a hot topic of discussion, but I really loved it. I'm sorry. Thank you for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye.